want to tell you a story about an incident that cost Wix thousands of dollars and could happen to your company too. But first, let me introduce myself. I'm Or, a backend team lead at Wix Premium Services. My personal favorite part of engineering is those moments of, yes, it works! For all of you that slept. Now, some people get this thrill from looking at a task pass after multiple failures. But me, I get it from looking at Grafana. And that's why I've been creating Grafana dashboards for the past 5 years. The way I see it, monitoring is the gift wrapper you put on before you ship your feature to production. And I've learned, sometimes the hard way, how to make monitoring directly serve business goals. At Wix, we operate at massive scale, powering over 20% of the world web traffic. Our microservices expose 150 million metrics per hour and 500 billion logs a day. For those of you who are not familiar with Wix, at Wix we power all kinds of sites, and many of them sell online using Wix as checkout. During checkout, merchants charge tax from their clients. And that's where our story begins. So last year, I was part of the Wix e-commerce platform, and my team was maintaining the tax calculation system, which is a critical component that determines how much tax you need to charge at every checkout. For several days, a bug silently deleted tax regions from merchant sites through some unexpected side effect. Now, our logs, they showed no errors. Our service uptime was 100%. Basically, all our traditional monitoring were green. But merchants, they weren't charging tax properly, and money was lost in almost every transaction. After 3 days of this invisible failure, complaints started flooding in. The damage was so severe that Wix had to compensate users with thousands of dollars. And that's not even the worst part, because in the postmortem, when our managers asked how we didn't have alert, there was a silence in the room. Because the truth is, zero tax is valid tax, and traditional monitoring just couldn't have caught this issue. Here's the kick. A simple business metric that would have tracked tax collection out of the gross payment volume could have caught this issue in hours instead of days. And this is why I'm so passionate about business-driven monitoring. Traditional monitoring told us everything was fine, while our business was bleeding money. And this isn't just a Wix problem. It can happen to any microservices-based product you're building right now. That invisible failure taught me something critical. Errors in latency, they can only tell you half the story. And when your services are technically working but are not delivering value, traditional monitoring just keeps you in the dark. What saved us from similar disasters since then isn't fancier error tracking or more complex logging. It was about monitoring what matters to the business, to the merchants, to the buyers, to our bottom line. Today, I'm going to show you how to implement business-driven monitoring with industry-standard tools for monitoring, but with completely different approach that will make you indispensable to your organization. And I promise, it's simpler than you think. So what do I mean by business-driven monitoring? Building business-driven monitoring means consistently asking, is the system behaving the way we expect? It's about looking at your product as a whole and asking what indicates that it does what it's supposed to do, what value should it bring on a daily basis. I'm talking about end-to-end monitoring of product funnels, tracking business KPIs to identify crucial bugs before users notice them. As I showed you in the tax incident, when you look at a single service and examine stats like latency and errors, you actually have zero idea if users get value from your product as a whole. Now, business analysts, well, they're in charge to make sure the business grows. But us developers, we need to make sure that the business works. And that's what we came to do today. So here's a simple yet powerful formula I like to use for business-driven monitoring. And I call it the 3-step formula. So step 1, define your business KPIs and map your product funnels. Then break them down to measurable steps. Step 2, and my personal favorite, Go to your production code and light it up with metrics and logs in order to measure these business KPIs in production. And finally, visualize and alert on what matters. This formula connects your code directly to business impact. In order to do so, we're going to use industry standard tools for monitoring, Prometheus and Grafana. Now, for those of you who never heard of them, trust me, they're amazing. They're fully open source, and I've used them at every step of my career. But I know they sound a bit like characters for a Marvel movie. Prometheus is your metric aggregation system. It consumes metrics from your pods and stores them. Then it's streamed into Grafana, where we create visualizations and alerts. So let's see how this formula looks in practice. E-commerce main business flow is checkout. And if you take a look at checkout, you can see that it's super complex. Behind every line here, there are dozens of microservices involved. But we came to monitor the product and not the pods, right? We want to look at this checkout as a whole and ask, what indicates that it does what it's supposed to do? What value should it bring on a daily basis? So let's start with the basics. Buyers need to buy. If buyers are not buying, then checkout is not working and nothing else matters. Now, if we want to be a bit more specific, we want to take a look at conversion. What is conversion? Conversion means that out of all of the checkouts that are opening, at least 85% of them are completing successfully. And now, if we want to dive into the money and the value that checkout should create, we want to make sure that at least $100K are streamed in Wix's checkouts every hour. So now that we have our KPIs, let's go light up our code. So we're going to use Prometheus client for Node.js, and that's an amazing opportunity for me to give kudos to the Prometheus open source community. These guys are amazing. They have client libraries for any language you can imagine. So thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Now let's go light up our code. So we're going to set up our Prometheus client. We're going to tell it to collect default metrics like CPU, memory, and all of the stuff that you know from production and we're not talking about today. And then we're going to tell it to collect our business metrics for our specific product. Now, for every KPI, we're going to define a metric to measure it in production. So first KPI, buyers need to buy. So we want to measure in production checkout completions. And the last step of checkout is payment, the buying part, right? So payment is a great example of where I would want more context. I want to know if they paid with Apple Pay or if they paid with Stripe, because if something goes wrong, I want to have this context. And that's exactly what labels are for. With this single line, I actually generate dozens of metrics in production, one per payment method. Labels are super useful, and I highly recommend. Second KPI, conversion. So we know the checkout is working, right? But we want to know how well it works. So we want to measure also the checkouts are starting and then divide the two. Makes sense, right? For those of you who are sharp in this late hour, you would notice that this formula is a bit off. And I'll walk you through it. So you start checkout, then you type in your delivery address, right? Then you pick your shipping method, and then you fill in your credit card. This entire process takes over a minute, most of the time. So if I'm measuring in production every minute this formula, I won't get an accurate conversion for my product. But now, I want to remind you all that we're not analysts, and we don't care. So the truth is, we want to make sure the business works. And in Wix's scale, in mass numbers, this formula gives us a good enough approximation, because I don't care if it's 87% or 89%. I want to make sure that my business works. So don't be a purist. Start measuring. Third KPI, last but not least, and now I want you guys to focus, because we're going to do something developers never do. We're going to measure money in our code. So pretty simple, we're going to add a metric to measure how much money is actually streamed in Wix's checkouts. But for some reason, developers rarely do. So We have our KPIs, we have our metrics to measure it in production. Now it's time to build our business-driven dashboard. And in order to do it right, we want to start with the high-level KPIs at the top, and then drill down to specific sub-products of checkout, like tax and delivery. So for every KPI I defined, I now have a visualization here to measure it in production. Amazing. Now I want you guys to notice something. My dashboard is green. That means I have thresholds, right? But how? If I just started measuring how I have thresholds. So the truth is, when you start, you don't have a good threshold. You should start with a magic number and then tune it every other week until you have enough historical data to work with. But the most important thing is to start measuring your business in production. All right, so now we did it for checkout, let's quickly do it for tax, the subproduct of checkout, where we had our incident, right? So tax has 3 KPIs, very similar to checkout. We want to make sure that merchants can charge taxes, that tax calculation returns successful results, and that tax charges are summed into at least 10K per hour. All right? And now we're going to light up our code. We're going to measure in production, tax calculation success, failure, how much checkouts are charged with tax, and how much tax is actually charged in those checkouts. And now, our business-driven dashboard has a new row for tax KPIs. Now, if you remember from the incident I told you about, the third KPI, tax charges per hour, if we had that, it would have dropped. It would have gone red. Because in these 3 days, our tax charges dropped significantly. But how will we know when to look at this amazing business-driven dashboard? How will we know when the next incident happens? That's exactly why we have alerts, right? I know you're used to waking up in the middle of the night if you have a CPU throttle or your error rate is spiking, but for some reason, we never wake up in the middle of the night when our business is bleeding money. And that's what I want you guys to change. I want you guys to track your business KPIs in production, to have business-driven dashboards, and to have alerts, because you guys care about your business. All right, let's recap. The 3-step formula. So step 1, define your business KPIs, map your product funnels, then break them down to measurable steps. Step 2 is to go to your production code, go to these product funnels, and light it up with metrics and logs in order to measure these business KPIs. And finally, visualize and alert on what matters. I challenge everyone here to implement business-driven monitoring for a single KPI within the next 2 weeks. Now, before we end, I want to say something on a personal note. I know business KPIs and even monitoring is outside of the comfort zone for many of us. But ownership is a choice. And for me personally, just choosing that mindset made development much more interesting. When you tie your code to business impact, your role changes. You start optimizing for outcomes and not just performance. You're not just writing code anymore. You're helping drive the company forward. And that's the difference between being just a developer and being indispensable. To help you get started, I created this quick start repo. It has templates and examples and everything you need to get started. I'm super excited to see what you're going to build. So thank you so much for coming. Feel free to reach out and enjoy the rest of your day.